Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellas in Ottawa on this Thursday. Tonight, new year, new approach.
This is a new year and we're now in a new era of partnership with China.
Today was a very important day in our relationship with China.
The feds forge forward on new ties with China, reaching energy agreements without concrete purchasing commitments. Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer will join our show with the opposition's response to Mark Carney's diplomatic reset. Then, the price of buying Canadian.
In these times, we've got to focus on looking after Canadians first and foremost.
The feds in Ontario put up big bucks to build Toronto transit cars here at home. We're going to dig into the anticipated return on investment with Infrastructure Minister Gregor Robertson in moments. Plus, does America need Canada?
The key operative word is need. All right? No, we do not need Canada.
Donald Trump's representative in Canada echoes the president diminishing U.S. interest in the North American Free Trade Agreement. Our front bench is set to unpack that diplomatic messaging with Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement. They're coming up a little bit later on in our show. First, though.
What we heard loud and clear is China is looking for reliable trading partners that don't use energy for coercion. China is already a major consumer of Canadian energy. The world wants more of what Canada has. Canada has the lowest carbon intensity LNG in the world, and we are decarbonizing our barrels and more aggressively looking to decarbonize our barrels than any other country in the world. That's consistent with the values of many of our trading partners, including the Chinese. They want more of what we've got.
Federal Energy Minister Tim Hodgson on a new memorandum of understanding with China signed as Canada pushes for a new era of trade relations. Prime Minister Mark Carney meeting with top Chinese officials, the superpower declaring this visit a, quote, turning point as the leaders detail a new economic and trade cooperation roadmap. Industry Minister Melanie Joly tying the timing of this visit to Donald Trump's New World Order.
This is a new year and we're now in a new era of partnership with China. There are a lot of things that we cannot control, but there are lots of things we can control. And we'll focus on what we can control. And who we do business with is something we can control. China is the third biggest investor in Canada with $50 billion invested in 2024. But also, China is our second biggest client in the world because it is our second biggest market where we export. And so, as we continue these conversations, and as, of course, there's important diplomatic engagement, we want to make sure that this makes sense to Canadians.
Another key pillar of the Fed's response to Trump has been digging in on Canadian investment. Today, the government announced hundreds of millions in new spending to kick off the new Buy Canadian policy. In this case, both the federal government and province of Ontario will increase their investments from $758 million to $950 million for the purchase of 55 new subway trains for Toronto, which will be made in Canada with 55% Canadian content. Gregor Robertson is Canada's Minister of Infrastructure. Hi, Minister. Good to have you back on the show. Thanks so much for making the time.
Good to be with you, Vashi.
I appreciate it. I think Canadians wholly appreciate the ideological imperative behind a Buy Canada strategy, as exemplified through the announcement that you're making today. But in this case, with these subway cars, to make it happen required, according to the announcement itself, more federal and provincial dollars. I understand it makes sense ideologically and politically, but does it make sense for taxpayers?
Absolutely. I think this is a great investment in Canadian workers and Canadian businesses through the supply chain, in particular in steel and aluminum. We want to be supporting the industries that are right now very troubled by the U.S. tariffs and investing in that supply chain right now for Canadian products. While there may be a slight premium right now for this project, it's the first big Buy Canadian project that we're bringing forward. We want to build up our supply chains, build up our domestic strength, and investing in Canadian workers and materials so that all future projects we can be even more competitive. And, you know, in these times, we've got to focus on looking after Canadians first and foremost.
The thing is, though, Minister, I take the point on all that. It's not really just a small increase, right? It's almost $400 million. And if you expound that and think about all the other pursuits that your government has talked about when it comes to Buy Canada, we could be talking about billions of extra taxpayer dollars. Again, is this like a new problem created by the solution you're proposing?
No, I think there are two ways to look at this. One of them is this is, as I said, the first major project. Canadian companies are going to get more and more efficient, more and more productive as they produce products that we need here in Canada, rather than being focused on exporting to the U.S. So I think we're going to get more and more competitive and bring the cost down with every project that we bring forward. Certainly in my portfolio, with housing, with infrastructure, the more that we can tool up our Canadian companies to produce the products, the more efficient, the better cost control that we're going to see in future projects. So I think there's that piece. There's also cycling the dollars within Canada. In my city, when I was the mayor of Vancouver, we did a lot of studies on community economic development, keeping the dollars in our city. I think right now, given the world circumstances, keeping the dollars in Canada so that they're being invested in Canadian workers and Canadian businesses, who in turn are supporting the Canadian businesses with the dollars that they spend. It keeps the dollars local or national here, rather than them being sent off to a foreign country for materials that come in, and those dollars are gone forever. We want to keep these dollars cycling in the Canadian economy for as long as possible. Our Prime Minister is an economic expert, well known for that. He's very strongly supportive of the Buy Canadian initiative that we're now leading forward.
And I do, like I keep saying, I understand why we would be supportive of it given what we're up against. But the way in which you just described, for example, the economics of it is the way in which we hear Americans talk about Buy American, right? Something that until very recently we opposed, that we said didn't make economic sense. Are you sure this is going to do the things that you just said it will and have all of those economic benefits? Do you have evidence to support that?
I think the world has really changed in the last year. I think, historically, there definitely was, a tough argument around global trade and optimizing between different countries. That world is gone. It certainly is gone with the United States. We may build up strength and trade relationships, and right now having the Prime Minister in Asia and Europe again, building those relationships can help us to restore some of that. But given the relationship with the United States right now, we have to focus on being strong in Canada, getting more resilient as a country. And the Americans and many other countries were already doing versions of this. I think it's important that we do this now for the good of our own country.
I wanted to ask you, Minister, about a meeting that you attended earlier this week in your home province with Coastal First Nations alongside the Prime Minister. Representatives from those First Nations spoke to reporters after the meeting and said that they maintain their opposition to any new pipeline supported by the MOU that your government signed with the provincial government in Alberta. Is that your understanding of the position after taking that meeting?
Certainly, the Coastal First Nations leaders were very clear on their position. And they were also very convincing in terms of the economic development that they support, that they've already built a very successful economy on the coast of BC. It's heavily focused on fisheries, tourism, that are reliant on having a healthy ocean. And so I think they're standing up for the economy that they have built on the coast of BC there. They are also very supportive of the LNG projects that are coming forward with the Major Projects Office, as well as the critical minerals and the North Coast Transmission Line. So these are major investments that are advancing right now, real projects that are coming forward that are well supported by the Coastal First Nations. And they're saying this is a lot for us to take on. We have to look after our coast, and the Government of Canada has real commitments around marine protected areas, coastal protection, that we need to step up and accelerate to make sure, as these major projects that are advancing right now, as they roll out, that we're doing the work to protect our coast and to make sure that the communities really benefit from them.
In their view, from what I understand that they have conveyed, publicly, one of the key elements of that coastal protection is the tanker ban. Do you support an exemption under the tanker ban as spelled out in the MOU your government signed?
At this point, the tanker ban stands, and at this point, the focus for us is on making sure that all of the work happening through the Major Projects Office right now, which involves a significant amount of shipping that will impact the coast of BC, we have to make sure that we are managing that very carefully and make sure that we can create this economic opportunity with LNG, with critical minerals, and making sure we're looking after the coast. So that's first and foremost. The tanker ban is in place, and it will be obviously a significant change to do anything about that. We don't have a project in front of us that would put that on the front burner. So at this point, we're really focused on how we manage the growth that's already in front of us on the coast, and how we make sure that we're protecting that important coastline and the jobs attached to it.
Respectfully, Minister, though, I asked for your specific position. And to be totally transparent, I asked because I remember when you were Mayor of Vancouver, your very distinct opposition to the construction of TMX. You may not have that pipeline in front of you, but your government, the cabinet you are a part of, has endorsed a memorandum of understanding with Alberta that, quote unquote, says Canada confirms that it will enable the export of bitumen from a strategic deep water port to Asian markets, including if necessary through an appropriate adjustment to the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act. Do you support that statement?
Well, certainly the commitment that's being made there is obviously hinging on the support of the First Nations and the support of the provinces affected, which in this case is BC. So meeting all those terms and conditions is what has to happen first. First there actually has to be a project and a proponent bringing forward a project with the appropriate financing. And that has not happened yet. So at this point, it's all speculation. I think it's important, really important for the Prime Minister and myself, Minister Tim Hodgson, to be in Prince Rupert to meet with the Coastal First Nations and make sure that those relationships are strong and we understand their perspective. We've got to make sure we're listening to community, to the province, and to see what comes forward if a project ever does come forward there.
I totally understand that point. I'm not sure, though, that the Prime Minister has used the word, or the document itself uses the word, that it hinges on the support of those First Nations or British Columbia. And again, I understand maybe you don't want to comment on something speculative, but the Memorandum of Understanding is a document your government wrote and endorsed. I am basing my question to you on what is explicitly outlined in that document, which is support for a potential exemption. Again, I'll put the question to you. Are you okay with that?
So I just say, Vashi, we have a constitutional obligation to work with First Nations. That's front and center here, and that's a big reason why. That's the baseline here for the next steps related to all of the major projects and all of the economic development we're talking about here. We have a commitment to do that as a country now, and so honoring that commitment, respecting the First Nations and the support that is inherent in the work that we do. And that's a baseline. We have to make sure we're doing much more than the baseline in terms of sustainability, in terms of looking after our coast on the West Coast, and the climate impacts of these projects, and the community impacts. My focus as Housing and Infrastructure Minister is making sure that the communities benefit and can keep up with the pressure from these major projects. And the northwest of BC has an enormous amount of pressure coming right now with LNG projects, critical minerals, North Coast Transmission Line. That'll be my focus. We'll see when the time comes, if the time comes with other projects coming forward, what has to change with respect to existing laws. That's sometime in the future if it comes.
It sounds like you don't want that new pipeline. Is that an incorrect interpretation or correct?
I think you're stretching this into something that it isn't. At this point, I want to hear from all of the people involved in this. First and foremost, the Coastal First Nations this week, with the Prime Minister. Obviously, we want to hear from the communities all affected across BC. And I want to know what the pressure points are going to be for housing and infrastructure in all those communities as well.
Okay, I will leave it on that note. Appreciate your time as always, Minister. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vashi. Take care.
It's Housing and Infrastructure Federal Minister Gregor Robertson still ahead. We're going to get reaction from Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer on the government's new approach in China. Back in a moment with that conversation. Welcome back to Power Play, a new era of partnership with China. That's the federal government's take ahead of tomorrow's high-stakes meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Joining us now to react to the government's new outreach strategy in China is Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. Hi, Mr. Scheer. Welcome back to the program. Thanks so much for making the time.
Always great to chat with you, Vashi.
On Chinese electric vehicles and EV tariffs, Mr. Polyev wrote on social media, Premier Ford was, quote, right to raise concerns about the impact on workers and our auto sector. The Premier of your home province, Mr. Scheer, Scott Moe, is asking the federal government to lift those EV tariffs, so punishing canola and agricultural tariffs from China are subsequently lifted as well. Are you saying Premier Moe is wrong?
We believe there's other options on the table. For example, this government could cancel the $1 billion taxpayer-funded gift in terms of a loan to the Chinese company to build ferries for British Columbia. There's lots of tools in the toolkit here. We of course, coming from a province that exports a lot of canola, understand exactly what's going on in the canola industry and the hardship that it has imposed on canola growers and those that work in the canola industry. We're also hyper aware of what will happen to automotive jobs throughout Canada if the Chinese government is able to flood the Canadian market with EVs that would then undermine jobs here in Canada. So, Mark Carney promised in the last election that he was the guy that could handle this kind of stuff, that he had the kind of secret sauce that knew how to thread these needles. And what we're saying is we should be coming back from China with net wins where we don't have to pit one region of the country against another. We can get those canola tariffs dropped while we still make sure that foreign countries aren't allowed to dump products into Canada and threaten Canadian jobs.
Would canceling that loan, though, be a net win? And I ask because I understand that the loan and of it, I understand the argument your party has been putting forward for months now, which is that it should never have happened in the first place. But from everything that I've garnered, the loan has already gone through. The BC Ferries deal has happened. They need those ferries to be constructed. And if they weren't constructed or replaced, then the cost would fall to British Columbians. So once again, even the solution you're putting forward, though I get it at the front end should never happen at the first place, even that is not a net win because it would come at a cost to British Columbians.
Well, we believe the longer-term costs of giving the leverage to the communist regime in Beijing has to be factored in on that as well. There would be benefits to Canadians if Canadian companies were able to replace what the Chinese company might be able to accomplish. But we have a situation where the Chinese government slapped tariffs on Canadian exports, and even after all of that, this Liberal government decided to give that gift of a taxpayer-funded loan to that company. And so what we're saying is, we have some leverage here that we're not using. And it's puzzling to me why, when Mark Carney is going to China to try to open up markets, to try to lift those tariffs, to try to rebalance the relationship, that's not even on the table. And we don't believe, the Liberals love to try to put these false choices. We either do this or we do that, and there's lots of optionality here that don't pit one region of the country against the other and don't threaten jobs either in the canola sector, in the producer sector, or in the automotive sector.
But I guess that's kind of my point. I understand the point that you're making and that your party has made, like I said, on many occasions, that loan should not have been granted from the Canadian Infrastructure Bank in the first place. But the reality of the situation, and ultimately a government, and in this case the Prime Minister, has to deal with the reality of the situation, is it did go through. The company has been explicit, BC Ferries has been explicit that if they're not replaced, it comes at a very, very steep cost to British Columbians. So even if the government did what you say they should do, it would pit one part of the country against the other. Is that not emblematic of the challenge that the Prime Minister faces?
Well, first of all, it's a challenge of the Liberals' own making, and I don't think we can lose sight of that. That the stacking negative consequences on top of bad Liberal decisions is something that Canadians should keep in mind. That we are here because of Liberal decisions, and so we don't have a lot of faith and trust in the same people that made those original terrible decisions to navigate our way through this one. China needs what Canada has. They need our food, they need our canola, they need our oil, they need our energy. And we'd like to see a government that goes to China and negotiates from a position of strength and says, look, we have what you want. Yes, unfortunately the deal on the loan may have already been made, but we don't accept from the Liberals that there's no optionality there, that there's nothing that can be done about that. We don't take them at their word for that. And when we're looking at things like, potential MOU on energy, it's raising a lot of questions. What's so hard about selling a Canadian product to a country that needs to import energy? So we've got a lot of leverage here, and it's a little bit troubling to see Mark Carney say one thing during an election, that he was the man with the plan, the guy that could navigate through all of this. I don't believe that he put this particular strategy in front of the Canadian people, that after labeling China as the largest national security threat to Canada, that then we would be going over there and potentially signing deals to open up markets to a country that has been engaged in practices like dumping, and that also represents such a big national security threat.
And I understand all of those points. I think those are very deserved questions to the government about the strategy that they are pursuing. But when I look back, for example, on the last time a Conservative government dealt with China under former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, I found in 2009 and 2012 6 joint statements or memorandums of understanding that were signed between the Harper-led government and the government of China at the time, including an energy cooperation agreement. The idea was framed in the exact same way Prime Minister Carney is right now: strategic re-engagement, a strategic relationship in areas of cooperation with China. Are you saying that Prime Minister Carney should not pursue what Prime Minister Harper tried to?
Well, first of all, I think you have to take into account that the situation has changed. When the previous Conservative government was opening up markets around the world, we were focused on diversifying our trade relationships with countries in every region. It was before things like 2 Canadians being held illegally by the Chinese government. It was before some of the surveillance and espionage accusations that have now come to light. It was before the Chinese government opened up police stations in communities around Canada. So I don't think it's fair to compare what was happening over a decade ago with what's happening today, with the reality of the current situation. Now, of course, Conservatives believe we should be diversifying our trade relationships, especially in light of the unfair tariffs that have been imposed by the U.S. government. But again, I would point to the fact that Liberal policies have weakened Canada's position. Had we approved Northern Gateway, which Conservatives were calling on, that Liberals vetoed, we would have already had that pipeline up and running and exporting to all kinds of countries in Asia, Japan, Korea, and others. Had we approved as a country a west to east pipeline that would have displaced foreign oil, including American oil coming into refineries in Eastern Canada, we'd be in a much stronger position. So we have no problem with opening up markets to sell our products. If the Chinese want to buy our canola with tariff-free, if they want to buy our LNG, our clean and ethical oil and gas, great, let's sell it to them. But we're very cautious, and we want to see what kinds of deals actually get signed, because we know that when you're dealing with a country like China, you have to be very vigilant on what the details are and what kind of exposure that Mark Carney is opening up the Canadian economy to.
But do you think, with great respect, Mr. Scheer, that you're going to sell more oil or more LNG to China without a change in the relationship or some sort of broad-based agreement or memorandum of understanding like the Prime Minister has embarked on? I mean, that's what feels a little bit incongruous about your party's position, right? You want to take a much harder line on China, not sign these kind of agreements, but you're saying approve a pipeline right now whose primary customer would be China.
But I guess I don't think there's anything incongruent about it. We're saying, yes, we hope that there are deals that come out of this trip, and concrete deals, not just plans to keep talking and, have conferences years ahead, years down the road, which is so far what we've seen from Mark Carney. A lot of air miles getting racked up, not a lot of concrete purchase orders. And so we're very much hopeful that Mark Carney's going to come back and say, good news, tariffs are gone, or good news, we're going to be able to sell LNG to China. What we're saying is that we would have had much more of a stronger position if this had been done years ago. And Mark Carney promised to move with unimaginable speed. Those are his words, not conservatives. And so far, all we have is a promise to keep talking. So what we're saying as conservatives, we really want to see the details. We want to really see what Mark Carney is giving away. A country like China that needs to import a lot of food and a lot of energy, it shouldn't be that complicated to sell them what they need. If Mark Carney goes and opens up, aspects of our automotive sector, if he doesn't get canola tariffs dropped, then conservatives are going to be highly critical of that, because that's not what Mark Carney said he would do during the election.
But I guess just final question to you. Again, I'm kind of confused. Like, if a few years ago, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor were being detained by China, why would there be something more concrete at this point? Like, this is the juncture that affords the possibility to make some sort of arrangement that allows for the very thing that your party is most focused on right now, which is getting in a pipeline approved right away to send more oil to China.
Well, I guess what we're saying is we are all for a concrete deal that lifts tariffs on canola, that allows Canada to export more to China. What we are saying simultaneously, I think this is what Canadians would expect, is that when you're dealing with a country like China, with the record that it has, with what it's done to both Canadian citizens, what it's done to our economy, and what they've acknowledged, what the Chinese government, what the communist government has acknowledged and has already done in terms of espionage and opening up police stations across the country, we need to be very vigilant on what the actual details are. And that's our message to Canadians today is, look, we all hope that Mark Carney is successful at dropping those tariffs and opening up new markets. We believe that we would be in a much stronger position. I mean, this is the same government that not so long ago was telling our allies around the world that there was no business case for LNG. This is the same party cheered on by Mark Carney himself, who vetoed pipelines that would have allowed us to sell oil and gas to all kinds of countries around the world, including in Asia. And so, we're hopeful, but given Mark Carney's track record and given the promises and the standard he set for himself, we are going to be very vigilant on what deal is actually signed and highlight that for this, so that the Canadian people can make a decision.
Okay, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. Mr. Scheer, pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
That's Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. You've now heard from the opposition and the government on the federal government's big reset with China. Up next, we're going to hear from our front bench. Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement will all be here. We're back in a moment with that conversation.
We're using burner phones for the first time when we covered this because China spies on journalists and businessmen. China intercepts communications. Is China really the right kind of partner for Canadian industry?
Listen, we've been clear-eyed. We're eyes wide open. We know this. But there's been investments by Canadian companies for years here. Tomorrow I'm meeting with Magna. Magna, one of the biggest auto parts companies in the world. They have 30,000 people working here. We're meeting with Manulife. We're meeting with BMO. These companies have been in China for years.
Is Canada ready to trust China now? Does it need to in order to gain greater market access? Those are key questions as the Prime Minister and his ministers pitch Canada to top Chinese officials ahead of Mark Carney's sit-down tomorrow with President Xi. What are the political stakes and potential consequences around the high-profile trip? Let's bring in our front bench for that discussion. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is with us. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Marco Mendicino is former chief of staff to Prime Minister Mark Carney and a former Liberal cabinet minister. He's now a senior counsel and strategic advisor for Castles. CTV political analyst and former Conservative industry minister James Moore is with us. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. And Tony Clement served in senior roles in Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper's cabinet. He's now CEO of Tony Clement International. Hi, everybody. Great to see you as always. Tony, I'll start with you. What is your assessment of how things are going so far, and what would you say the political stakes ahead of this big meeting between President Xi and the Prime Minister are?
Well, I don't know where it's going. I mean, I don't really like this Vashi. I'll be honest with you. I know the Prime Minister wants to, make other opportunities, not with the United States. I get that, but China is not the right. The Chinese Communist Party is not the right dance partner. They kidnapped two of our citizens. They tried to interfere with our elections. And as the previous speaker was saying, there's a lot of espionage and skullduggery that goes along with dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. So, yeah, there's lots of other choices out there: Japan, Korea, even in Asia, Vietnam, even. But China, I spent most of my time in Stephen Harper's cabinet making sure China didn't take over the oil sands and all of our minerals production. So I'm not happy with this, I got to tell you.
It's interesting because I was thinking back to that as I was listening, Marco, to the sort of the MOU, the description of the MOU, and I haven't read all the details. I don't know exactly how it's going to materialize, but there appears to be a much bigger opening, particularly where energy is concerned, for additional Chinese investment. I remember covering the big Nexen decision under the Harper government, where it was like a massive deal to approve CNOOC takeover, and the line at the time was, "That's it," right? Since then, we've had a somewhat similar posture, particularly around the oil patch. It felt like a very different signal today. Do you feel like it's a different signal, and what do you think is behind that?
I do think it's a different signal. I think we're living in a different time, and I would say respectfully to Tony, they have been a dance partner. China has. They're our second largest trading partner, and while I think in a perfect world, we would just be focused on one side of the ledger when it comes to relationships. We have to take a look at the world as we see it right now, and it is different. Look, I think the MOUs specifically are a signal that there is an openness to more economic cooperation. I think the challenge really is going to be to find ways to seek compromise between things like the tariffs that we put in place when it comes to EVs to defend our auto manufacturing sector, whereas we also want to see relief for canola in Saskatchewan. I think it's a good thing that Scott Moe is attending with the Prime Minister. And I think the reality is this, that today, trade is really about finding ways to seek alignment on interests as opposed to values.
And what also strikes me about that, another thing I was thinking about today, James, was like it was just a few years ago where the position was friendshoring. Like the approach that countries like ours, and ours specifically, was going to take to facilitating greater trade, to facilitating more cooperation in the world, was through alignment on values versus what Marco and now many other countries are saying too, which is like we've got to be pragmatic given the threat of Trump. What is your view of that?
Yeah, look, I think given the productivity numbers in Canada and the struggling economy, I think cash shoring is kind of what I think a lot of people are looking for. And exploiting export markets is something I think that's fundamental for Canada. Marco is right. China is Canada's second largest trading partner, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And diversification is important. I think part of the reason why Prime Minister Carney is actually there is for the conversation we're having right now, which is Canadians, as the United States gets more and more belligerent and less trustworthy and less reliable for as far as an export market goes, Canada's going to have to trade with other countries around the world, and there's going to be some tough dialogue that has to happen within this country, and some comfort found with some of those markets that we're going to do business with. Some things we will never trade with China. Some things we will not be able to collaborate with in China because of the nature of the way in which the regime deals with the rule of law. But I can tell you that the province of Saskatchewan, that's why Premier Scott Moe is there, they would like to sell a lot more canola there. We would like to have more access to their market. We want to have steady access in terms of LNG. They would buy every drop of LNG we could produce in British Columbia, I can tell you, and get it into those Chinese markets. So there are certain commodities and certain opportunities within China that are specific and unique to that market that we should be pursuing and should have access to. But a broader trading relationship, I think we shouldn't look to just one country, but we should have greater diversification. And the good news is for Canada is that we are the only country in the world that has tariff-free access to more than 52% of the global economy. We're the only country in the world that's a member of CUSMA, but also the Canada-Europe Free Trade, Canada-South Korea Free Trade, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So, going market to market on commodity to commodity, deal by deal basis, that's going to become more of what the job of the Prime Minister is going to be. And I think today is part of that, and there can be a lot more of this as I think, standard operating procedure for Canada's Prime Minister, whoever that is, on a go-forward basis.
Is there a way to kind of have it all, though, with China? And even using the example of canola, right? Like, as we try and secure more market access, if it were for canola, I mean, that is what China picked to hit us back on in response to the EV tariffs, because that sector is so vulnerable to China, just as it was in 2018 when they levied other tariffs on the same sector. Christy.
Well, okay, first, we heard Ambassador Hoekstra say recently, well, we don't really need Canada. So we've got the United States saying they don't need us, they don't want to trade with us, we're not relevant to them. And then we think that we shouldn't start trading with other countries that with whom we also have serious disagreements. I'm not sure that the way the Americans have treated, it seems to me like the way the Americans have been treating Canada would suggest that we should not be conducting our relationships with countries based on the fact that we share the same values, that we visit a lot, that we have a lot of family across the borders. We should be making those decisions based on where Canada's economic interest really lies. Now, there are issues here, like Jimmy Lai, for example, and other Canadians or people highly connected to Canada who've been detained in China. Those issues remain. But, when we were in really tough times in British Columbia, I mean, I did a lot of trade missions to China, and I'll tell you, they were the ones that invested in all of their three major oil companies invested in Canada in LNG. They saved our forest industry when the Americans had threatened it really profoundly with their tariff changes that they'd made. So this is really important for Canada, and I would say as a Western Canadian, the question isn't just should we be trading with China, because I think that's a gimme. They are when you live on the West Coast, you see how much closer they are than trading with Germany, as an example. But the question is also, is the government going to choose EVs in Ontario in a market that's highly subsidized, producing cars that are very expensive, where there's very little trust that they'll be charging infrastructure, or are they going to choose canola, which contributes $40 billion or something like that to the Canadian economy in Western Canada, which has a well understood supply chain, lots of customers, and we know is going to continue without much government subsidy to be able to grow the Canadian economy. To me, that is just as important a question about whether or not we decide we want to trade with China, because I think it's an absolute gimme that we should be doing that.
I think we'll find out if my timing is correct at 3 a.m. Eastern when the Prime Minister gives his press conference on the final day in China, or midnight British Columbia time. We're going to take a quick commercial break. You heard Christy mention those comments from Ambassador Hoekstra. We're going to play them for you next and get the panel's reaction after that break.
I don't even think about those things.
No, we do not need Canada. Sometime this summer, sometime hopefully this fall, we will have a new outline of how we do business together, and whether those relationships that we have put in place, whether those will foster and grow, or whether Canadian companies and American companies will go their separate ways because of the decisions that are made by their governments. Yeah. If Canada's negotiating position, and they believe that this strengthens their negotiating position to ban American products, encourage their citizens not to travel to the United States, that's their negotiating position, and it kind of sets a tone for the relationship.
U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra is speaking to my colleague Elias Makos on Montreal radio station CJAD, part of the iHeartRadio Talk family. He says, as you heard there, the U.S. does not need Canada, echoing earlier comments this week from President Donald Trump. But the ambassador does say our countries could have new terms of trade engagement by the summer or fall. So where does that leave Canada at the negotiating table? Our front bench is back for that discussion. Christy Clark, Marco Medicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement. Christy, you mentioned the comment in the last segment, so I'll pick up with you. What do you take from those comments?
Well, it's, the thing about Ambassador Hoekstra, he is a fantastic voice that almost sounds like President Trump. So you know that he's taking the government's line and he's delivering it very seriously. I think what he's telling us is something we should listen to. But I really, to me, and I've said this before on the show, Vashi, I think the CUSMA agreement is something that they are going to leave to the very last. Out of all the tariff stuff, they're going to make it hurt for as long as possible for Canada. But the thing is, they do need Canada, or they believe they do, and what they want is the same thing they want from Greenland, which is they want our critical minerals. They want our tungsten, our molybdenum, our germanium, all of those rare and difficult to find minerals, which tungsten, for example, is only mined in Russia and China, but not in Canada. They want to get their hands on that. There's tremendous military uses for all those minerals. They are going to leave CUSMA to the very end, and then after we're really hurting, they're going to say, well, why don't you give us a chunk of your critical minerals industry, guarantee us access, and then we'll get the thing settled. I think that's how this is all going to go, and everything in advance of that is just going to be a lot of pain for Canadians, because I don't think they have any interest in getting any of this settled. So I think Ambassador Hoekstra was absolutely telling the truth about that in terms of the government's position, but I think he was absolutely wrong when he says that they don't need us. They really do need us.
Do you think, James, that comments like that and the ones earlier this week from the president are a negotiating tactic or something we have to take literally?
I mean, look, we're now a decade into the Trump era, and so I think we observe these comments, but it kind of doesn't really matter. And obviously, Ambassador Hoekstra is a person of great importance in the current dynamic. But look, the reality is, and I say this as a former politician, politicians come and go, governments come and go, ambassadors come and go, but relationships, economics, and public policy endures. And the great economic fact of the Canada-U.S. relationship is that it's the most prosperous economic partnership in the history of the world. And Ambassador Hoekstra knows that. He's a former politician from Michigan. He understands the cross-border relationship and how many Michiganders' livelihoods are dependent on Canadians buying their stuff. And the two-way trade relationship is going to endure and it's going to prosper. I hope that his comment was actually an answer to a question about, does the United States need Canada like the United States apparently needs Greenland, and in which case the 51st state conversation can be dropped off the map, hopefully, for the United States. But look, we're the United States' biggest customer. Even a casino owner knows who their biggest gambler is when they come into the casino. Everybody knows who their biggest customer is. And so the Canada-U.S. relationship will prosper and endure in spite of the current contemporary politics. Canadians are angry and frustrated at the rhetoric of the United States and the approach by President Trump, rightfully so. So Canadians, if they don't want to vacation in Florida or Las Vegas and they want to stay home in Canada, people are voting with their wallets in the way that they can, and they're entitled to do so. And the ambassador shouldn't be upset about that. He should frankly expect it.
Yeah, he is upset about it. It's not the first time that he's denoted tone, particularly from politicians, let's say, at the provincial level, toward the president, which is interesting given some of the previous comments from the president towards our former prime minister. But I'll put that aside for a second. What do you take from the comments, Marco?
Yeah, I've always thought that Ambassador Hoekstra has done Canadians a favor by being very raw in his candor, which can sometimes be, frustrating and unnerving. But I also think that, saying that Canada's irrelevant or that we don't need Canada just is perhaps the grossest understatement of an over $1 trillion bilateral trade relationship. And, just to put some human dimension to this, it's hard to say that CUSMA is irrelevant when, you have Canadian and American workers working on either side of the Detroit River, putting together over 1 million cars every year. It's hard to say to a lumber worker on either side of Canada's country on the coast that the wood that they cut and then ship to the United States to go and build millions of homes is irrelevant. It's tough to say that, the aluminum that we ship to the United States that goes into rail and aerospace and other sectors is irrelevant. I mean, what happens to all of those goods if they just evaporate? So I think while those comments are at times very frustrating, they don't square with the economic reality. And I think on the other side of all of this, it explains why the Prime Minister has to go abroad and really fortify our trade relationships in other markets. It explains why here at home, we've got to move more quickly to get energy to market, get LNG to Asia, get more oil to our markets, look for new customers when it comes to critical minerals and the like. And it explains why we've got to accelerate, housing and the defense industry. So to my mind, yes, these comments that are made, they can be frustrating, but we've got to be really focused on what's important here at home as well.
Last word to you, Tony.
Well, this is the standard negotiating tactic X-14 of the Trump administration. So they always try to get their interlocutor off balance, scurrying around in circles, tearing their hair out. So I take it with a grain of salt. Like James said, I'll say it my way. Money talks and what walks, okay? Like we have a $1 trillion economy with them. And Donald Trump can go around the world. He can go to Saudi, he can go to UAE, he can go to South Korea. Oh, look I've got a $600 billion investment. We'll see whether those investments really happen. Like a lot of people, they say what they have to say that pleases Donald Trump when he's in the meeting, and then a lot doesn't happen. We actually do business with America, and they need us. We're part of the continent. We're part of the hemisphere. Let's not put ourselves in a little box and worry about it that way. Now, we do have a lot of negotiating we have to do, but at the same time, we have some arrows in our quiver for sure.
Okay, I will leave it on that note. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate the discussion. As always, Christy Clements, James Moore, and Tony Clement, our front bench. I'll take a quick commercial break. We've got more Power Play on the other end of that break.
We need to make sure that we continue to have a very strong auto sector. There's 125,000 people working in the sector with direct jobs. Indirect, it becomes 400,000 people involved in the auto sector. And at the same time, we're trying to attract a lot of investments from Korea, from Germany, and also we're looking at different partners around the world. And so these are ongoing conversations, and that's why we'll have more to say tomorrow.
That is Federal Industry Minister Melanie Joly. Our takeaway today is about something that might be announced tomorrow, to what she indicated there. She was speaking about EV tariffs, Chinese EV tariffs or Canada has applied on Chinese EVs, I should say. In response, China applied very punishing tariffs to canola and a host of agricultural products. The result of that has been different positions taken by different provincial leaders in the country, including Saskatchewan's Scott Moe, who would like to see some sort of relief for those canola tariffs. And the Chinese ambassador has said to CTV News previously that a quid pro quo would be something that China envisions. So if we take off those EV tariffs, they will take off the canola and pork and other agricultural product tariffs. That's something that Saskatchewan's Scott Moe supports. Manitoba's Premier Wab Kinew, as you heard on this program last night, said he supports. But Ontario's Premier Doug Ford does not support. Tomorrow, as we heard there from the Industry Minister, Melanie Joly, we might get some news on whether this trip to China results in anything tangible on the tariff front. We will be paying very close attention to news on that subject. I'm going to leave our program Power Play there for tonight. I'm Vashi Capellos. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.